Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Luncheon with the Experts, a Carcinoid Cancer Foundation program brought to you by Tercera Therapeutics. My name is Rain Bennett. I am your host, and I'm a filmmaker that has been working with CCF, as I just told our guest today, for almost a decade. I think this year marks the decade, actually. I think it was 2011. I was living in New York, and I had done documentary work with other medical foundations, healthcare foundations, and it was a match made in heaven. CCF and I found each other, and we started small on a series of videos back then, and we have updated those videos and done lots of videos in between, lots of work, and now we are doing live video series as well as the produced videos, all of them with the same mission in mind, which is to educate people and raise awareness about this disease, about neuroendocrine tumors. As you all know, if you are tuning in, if you're a regular on the show, or if you're a newcomer, you're probably here for the same reasons, and you understand that this disease is very unique. And it really takes a lot of the community building that we're doing and a lot of the sharing of information that we're trying to do. So we appreciate you so much for being here. For those that are here every week, you probably already know the drill and are telling us where you're signing on from in the world. For those that are new, let us know where you are. The thing that astounds me every week is how far this program reaches. After it's been on for a day, or the videos lived here, thousands of people have viewed it. But when we're broadcasting live, we have people all over the world, and that's just that's amazing to me. And so if you are wherever you are, let us know where you are signing on from in the world. Say hello to everybody while we get the show started. We have a few little announcements, some disclaimers. First of all, we always want to thank our presenting sponsor, Tercera Therapeutics. We absolutely couldn't do the show without them. And we always like to say this message from them at the top of the presentation. That is the opinions expressed by the guest presenters, as well as the questions asked by the audience, that's you all at home, haven't been created or suggested by the sponsors of Luncheon with the Experts. And CCF does not endorse or promote any of the views, opinions, or information expressed in the presentation today. Audience members should not rely solely on the opinions or information expressed by the guest, and should seek guidance and direction from their own medical advisors regarding any choices they make about their health or treatments. All right. So I always like to reiterate that last statement, because that is the real takeaway that we want you to have. We're going to give you some good advice and general direction, but we definitely don't know your specific case. So take that advice and general direction back to your home team that does know your specific case, and make the best plan of action forward for you. And that's one thing we also learn on the show. Each case of the disease is different, and each patient is different. Their goals are different, and what they're dealing with outside of the disease are different. So make sure you talk to your home team. So today we have a really unique episode. Today our guest is Dr. Stephen Pantilat. How are you, Dr. Pantilat?
I'm well, thanks, Rain. Nice to be with you.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. So let the people at home know, if they aren't familiar with you and your work, what you do, what you specialize in, and how they can get the most value out of this time with you today.
Sure. So I'm a palliative care physician. I'm the chief of the Division of Palliative Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. And my work is in palliative care. So I'm not a cancer doctor. I'm not a NET expert. My expertise is in palliative care. And for people who may not be familiar, palliative care is medical care that's focused on improving quality of life for people with serious illness. And we would say a NET tumor is a serious illness. And the focus of palliative care is really on improving quality of life. How can you live as well as possible for as long as possible? And, in palliative care, we assume that you have experts in the serious illness that you have. So you are being cared for by someone who knows about NET tumors and is caring for you that way. Our goal really is on the rest of you, the whole person, symptoms, helping make good decisions about treatment, and providing support that can be emotional, spiritual, practical, psychological support for the person who's sick and for their family members.
Absolutely. I love that. So for those at home, I know you're going to get a lot out of today's show. This is something that comes up a lot. I'm going to reiterate this periodically throughout the show today so that people that are joining us late will understand. quality of life content comes up every week. I know you have a lot of questions, but sometimes we I wouldn't say struggle, but we have so many questions, and sometimes they're in the dense esoteric world of nets. We're talking very specifically about PRRT or something like that, but we always have questions like this. So this is a unique episode, and I think you're going to get a lot of those questions answered. So go ahead and start sending your questions in about palliative care, about your quality of life, about all those other things outside of your disease that contribute to your journey forward that we already alluded to. A couple of things before we get the show started, I want you to know, and a couple of things I want you to help me achieve, or a couple of asks and a couple of gives. First of all, if we don't get to all your questions, which inevitably we don't, because it's a good problem, but we get a lot of questions. So if we don't, I highly encourage you, or even if you have follow-up questions, to reach out to Carcinoid Cancer Foundation. You can message them privately here on their Facebook page. You can also reach them at their website, carcinoid.org. This video will live on the Facebook page under the videos tab. It'll be evergreen, so you can always refer back to it. And then starting Monday, we republish it on YouTube for anyone that who doesn't have Facebook. So my two asks that I ask at the top of each episode each week, and you all do a great job of this. Every week, the real benefit is from this virtual interactive one-on-one session with an expert. Okay. Today we have a really unique episode. So if you know someone who would benefit from this, the true value is being here while it's going on. You can tag them in the comment section. You can also just share the video to their Facebook page. Let them know that, even if you know them personally, text them, email them, let them know this video is going on if they weren't aware, or if they jotted it down on their calendar but they got busy. Let them know this is going on, although they will be able to refer back to it if they have a question they want to get across. Like, this is the time to do it. And then my second ask is, if you see a question in the sidebar in the comments section that you also have, or you're interested in the answer to, there's a few different reactions that Facebook gives you the option to. You can like it, love it, a few different things you can choose, but they all effectively work the same for me. They kind of upvote that question. They let me know that there's a demand for it. If I see that 5 people have liked that question, then I understand, okay, people really need to get that question answered. I need to get that question across. So that helps me do my job, which is to serve you. So really, you're helping yourself there. So that would be super helpful. And finally, before we get started, I always like to ask if you have downloaded and checked out CCF's free Net Cancer Health Storylines app. This app makes it very easy to record your symptoms, medications, moods, nutritional concerns, a lot of the stuff we'll talk about today, and much, much more. So if you haven't, please do that. And lastly, as we go on through the show, if there's anything that Dr. Pantilat mentions, resources, medications, articles, something like that, we'll try our best to add those in the comments as well, so that you don't have to jump out of the Facebook tab, open a Google window and search for that. We'll try to do all that work for you. That is our job, after all. So let's get the show started. Hello from Sacramento. Hello from Syracuse. A lot of people from California. Shout out to everybody from North Carolina, like myself. Dr. Pantilat, I guess the first question that I have, which I know is a common one in your line of work, is could you help us understand the difference between palliative care and hospice? Where is that line?
Yeah, great. That is a really common question, right?
For sure.
So the way we think of it is that palliative care is, if you will, the universe of care that's focused on improving quality of life for people with serious illness. Mm-hmm. So when you take that view and you say, how can we improve your quality of life? How do we take care of you as a whole person in your life, help you, do the things that are most important to you, to live as well as possible for as long as possible? That's mm-hmm. palliative care. There are many ways to deliver palliative care. You can get palliative care from a team in the hospital. You can get it in the clinic. You can get it by telemedicine. You can get it at home. So there are many ways to get palliative care. Hospice is one way to get palliative care. It's a particular kind of palliative care service. Sure. So the philosophy of care is palliative care. Okay. Hospice in the US is really defined by a benefit, by a kind of a set of rules about how it's provided. In general, provided at home. It requires a 6-month prognosis, typically, to qualify for hospice services. Mm-hmm. It typically means that you've decided to focus exclusively on comfort rather than on continuing to try and manage the underlying disease. That's not 100% true, but in general, that's true. So in this case, it would be for people who said, you know what, I'm done with chemotherapy. I'm done with radiation. I'm done with surgery, done with all that. I really want to focus on my quality of life. And the doctor thinks I could have a 6-month prognosis. You can live longer than that, but it's not unreasonable that you might die within 6 months to qualify.
So then in essence, hospice is a piece of palliative care.
Right.
Or kind of like the square and rectangle metaphor.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say? Like hospice is part of palliative care, but all palliative care is not hospice.
That's exactly right. That's exactly how I say it.
Oh, awesome.
All hospice is palliative care, but not all palliative care is hospice.
Look at that.
So
Great minds thinking
inside palliative care. Exactly. That's right. And really hospice is, focused on as people are approaching the end of life.
Okay,
Whereas
got it.
palliative care can start from the moment of diagnosis all the way through curative intent treatment, and even into survivorship.
And that's something that, and even, while a lot of our guests are net experts, and that's not necessarily, your area of expertise, this always comes up for net patients because it's typically, hopefully, unfortunately, many of the times it's managed as more of a chronic condition. So quality of life, this always comes up, even when we're talking about treatments or diagnoses or scans or anything like that. Like quality of life is always seems to be a variable that's considered by doctors, specifically with this disease. Granted, I haven't worked with a lot of other diseases. I've been working in the net community for 10 years, but I see that a lot. And even the nurses that we have, this seems to be something that people start discussing quality of life with net patients very early on. So I think that's a great point to mention. I have a lot of questions because I'm big. I'm not a medical expert. I'm a storyteller and writer and love the psychology of things. And so I'm really interested in that part of like how we manage emotionally and psychologically. I do a lot of work with CCF and create a lot of videos for that, but the show's not about me. So I want to get to some of the questions from the audience, obviously, but I may have some as we go on because I'm super interested in that aspect of it. That being said, let's go ahead and start taking some from the audience. Patricia Murphy, friend of the foundation, also been a guest on the show. She says, is there a typical team in palliative care? What is the best way to initiate palliative care? Care.
Great question, Patricia. So you asked about a team, and you're right. Palliative care is provided by a team. It really is a team care. When we think about what are the issues that really impact your quality of life, it's everything from the psychological to the physical to the spiritual to the practical. And so a palliative care team is typically a nurse, a social worker, a chaplain, a physician, sometimes a pharmacist or a psychologist as well. And if you really think about what are all those issues that really matter to you about living as well as possible, those are the issues. And you can't, a doctor alone can't do it, a social worker alone, a nurse alone can't do it. So it really is provided by a team. How do you get palliative care? You ask your doctor. Generally, it's a referral like you would be referred to any other specialist. So palliative care is a medical specialty, and it would be like getting referred to any other medical specialty. And some palliative care teams will take referrals directly from patients. So we have patients sometimes who just contact us and say, hey, I'd really like to get palliative care and to come see you. And we try to make that work. But in general, you can ask your doctor. I will say that there's still some misunderstandings out there in the world for patients and for doctors about palliative care. And it really gets back to your question, Rain, about, the difference between palliative care and hospice. There is often a misperception that palliative care is for people who are dying. And while it is true that palliative care, we have an expertise that can help people who are approaching the end of life to be as comfortable and peaceful as possible, really the majority of our work is about helping people live well with their serious illness. But you may ask your doctor for a referral and the doctor will say, oh, you're not ready or you don't need it yet. What I tell patients is, just explain what you understand about palliative care. Say, I really appreciate that. I appreciate that I have a good prognosis, but here's all the things that have been going on my understanding is that a palliative care team can really help me with this range of issues, focused on my quality of life. And I'd really like to see them. So almost like you have to educate your doctor a little bit sometimes.
That this is also a theme that is recurring here on the show that we talk about a lot. And another point that comes up a lot is, I think I've kind of touched on this or alluded to it at least, is that each patient has their own goals. And I think a lot of it is peeling back those layers of the onion and understanding also, well, what's better, what do you really want? What are you trying to achieve? Is it quality of life? Is it quantity of life? Is it not feeling the pain that you're feeling? I think it really takes those questions, which leads me to a question. When you are first dealing with a patient, what are the first questions that you ask them?
Often my first question often is, what do you understand about palliative care? Just to see what
Good
people
point.
think. Not everybody completely understands it. And so it's
Right.
really helpful for me to know, what do you understand about palliative care and why you're here? And some people really know a lot. They've read a lot and really understand it. And some people, it's interesting what people say. And so we start from there to say, like, this is what we're about. Then my next question is typically just tell me about how you're doing. How are you? How are things going?
That simple
And
question opens a lot.
it opens a lot, and people begin talking about typically the things that are really important to them without any judgment about, it's not about tell me about your pain. It's not tell me about your cancer. It's not just tell me about you. How are things? And it's super open. And, our visits are, our initial visits in our clinic are about an hour long because it just takes time to get to know people enough to be able to understand what's important to them.
Yeah. Something you just made me realize is I was talking just before your answer here, your comment here about understanding what their goals are, asking them what their goals are. That question though that you brought up is such a better way to approach that than hey, what are your goals? I mean, sometimes a question like that is it's almost too, I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like people almost not get defensive, but it's hard to answer that. But when you ask a simpler question, like, tell me how you are, tell me what you're going through, like that will open up those things and they will tell you their goals and what's important to them.
Yeah.
So I think that just shows right there your expertise, and your experience in this field, because sometimes the simple, more emotional questions opens up and answers those things that you're really trying to get to. So I just think it's one of those things that's so simple as profound. You know what I mean? How are you?
Yeah.
So next question from Kathy. Kathy says, I've been hospitalized with bilateral pulmonary emboli. Palliative care will help me how? I'm still struggling and I have such sadness. I'm sorry to hear that, Kathy. Dr. Pantilat, any ideas?
Yeah. Oh, Kathy, I'm sorry to hear about that. How can palliative care help? Well, you mentioned sadness. That's something the palliative care can help with. Sometimes sadness is sadness. Sometimes sadness is depression. Sometimes sadness has to do with like the moment. Sometimes it has to do with the future, but really trying to explore and understand sort of what that's about, where that comes from, how to think about it, maybe how we can help you with it. So that's one area where palliative care can be helpful. I don't know how the pulmonary embolism is impacting you, whether it's making you feel short of breath, whether it's causing chest pain, which is possible. Palliative care can help with that as well. And if you're thinking about sort of a variety of treatments going forward, if you have some decisions to make about treatment to maybe prevent the next pulmonary embolism, or to how to think about that, palliative care is really helpful in just helping you make medical decisions that really align with the things that are most important to you and what you really want. In part, as palliative care teams, we don't do the treatment. So in some ways we're kind of a neutral party in it. We don't give the chemo. We don't do surgery. We don't treat the underlying illness. So often we can have a more maybe objective way of looking at it and really talking with you about what's most important. You know, it's interesting. I had this happen with a patient of mine just this week who's not a palliative care patient, but was thinking about surgery for his back pain. So a totally different situation. And he was really trying to, it's a big operation. And there I was, and I suddenly thought, wait, if this was palliative care, I would say, hey, what's most important to you going forward? Like, how is this impacting your life? And what's the hardest part? And he said, well, the hardest part is I can't walk because I have pain. And I said, well, if we took care of the pain, could you walk better? And he said, well, yeah, that would take care of it. And it just really completely changed our conversation about what was most important, from is surgery a good idea to pain is getting in the way of me living my fullest life, and how might we treat that? And so it's really trying to refocus. I think what you said, Rain, about goals is really important. The way I think of it is, I often ask my patients, you know, when you look to the future, what do you hope will happen? You know, what's the important thing for you?
Absolutely.
So that's what I would, you know, that's what I would ask Catherine. You know, Catherine, what do you hope will happen? What's hardest about what you're going through?
Yeah. You know, I think it's a really fine point that you made about the objectivity that comes with that, where, and this is not to criticize you know, net experts or doctors, you know, surgeons or anything like that, but like it is a fair point to say that there may be a little more subjectivity, or just, you know, their experience with, like, this is the disease, this is how we treat it, et cetera, and maybe ingrained with a pattern of how they approach it. But I like, you know, what you said about that. It kind of allows you to look at it a little more objectively and ask those questions. And I think the net doctors are really good at that. But I think that's a good point to mention, to sit back and be able to see the whole picture, and then change the way you approach the disease. Folks, if you're just joining us or joined us late, this is Luncheon with the Experts, a Carcinoid Cancer Foundation program. My name is Rain Bennett. I'm your host, and today we have a very special guest, Dr. Stephen Pantilat, and we're talking about palliative care. Palliative care, not necessarily for NETs specifically today, although a lot of NET patients have questions about this. Palliative care, quality of life, your psychology, your spiritual state, your mental state, your physical state, all of the other things outside of your diagnosis and your disease that disease, you know, makes you have to navigate and deal with. That being said, in 2018, you know, I said at the top of the program, I've been working with CCF for about 10 years. And in 2018, we created a series, a patient-centric series. And some of you that are tuning in have seen that, and some have even been on that. Shout out to Pat Murphy. And it was about how patients psychologically and emotionally navigate this disease through love and work and yoga and, like, you know, those aspects of it. And it was a really powerful series. I'm very, very proud of it. It won some awards. It got nominated for some great awards. So if you haven't seen that, it's back in 2018. It's on the videos tab. It's very, very apropos of what we're talking about today. So I'm really proud of those videos. And if you want to check those out, you can see them on the videos tab. So Dr. Pantilat, I feel like I cut you off there at the end. Did you have something that you were finishing saying, or?
Yeah, I was just reflecting that, you know, sometimes people come to us and what their goals are, really achieving their goals means that they should have surgery, or they should have more therapy of one kind or another, or get another opinion. And, you know, I think sometimes people think that, you know, palliative care is really about comfort and that we're somehow against treatment, but far from it.
No.
You know, very often I look at my patient, I say, you know what, the way to get your goals, you need surgery, or you really, from what I'm just listening to you talk and the things that are most important to you, it seems to me like more treatment is really the right thing for you. You should try this. You should enter in this trial. I mean, given what I know about you and the conversations we've had. So it really is trying to match what's most important to someone with what the options are for for achieving that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We talk every week on the program about the importance of a multidisciplinary approach. I think this
Yeah,
is what we're talking about for
right.
sure. Let's talk about palliative care and insurance. We have a question from Dorothy that says, is palliative care covered by most insurances? What's been your experience with that?
Yeah, Dorothy, important question. Absolutely. It's covered like any other medical specialty, any other treatment. So all insurance pays for it, Medicare pays for it in every setting. Absolutely.
Awesome. Good to hear.
Yeah.
Your experience with nutrition, foods, is that a part of what you do?
So we work closely with, dietitians, for example.
Mhm.
So, food is really important for people, and diet can be very important to, how people feel and to their healing. Um, this is one of those areas I'm not an expert in, but we
Mhm.
do work with dietitians. I will say the place where that often comes up for us as palliative care doctors is to encourage people to eat the things they like. Sometimes people are, they're just not feeling it. They're not that hungry. They're not, they think they should be eating a particular way that they don't want to eat. And often our encouragement is, eat what you like
Yeah.
enjoy it. There's a lot of joy that comes from eating, and rather than seeing it as a burden or as another chore, as another something you have to do, to really just think about, okay, what do I like? How can I
Right.
bring joy and fun into my life?
Yeah, and I might add to that, like, and let me know if you agree with this, of course. Eat what makes you feel good. I think that your body tends to let you know. I mean, so when you say eat what you like, maybe people start thinking, oh, I'll eat cake. Your body will let you know when you've had too much cake.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and your body will let you know that night or the next day when you've eaten something that is nutritional and good for you in terms of your energy level and things like that. So I think that's a good point to mention too. And oftentimes people do get too hyper focused on, oh, I must have, this many grams of, protein, this many grams of that. And it may be too much at times, and just keep it simple.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. If you eat a whole cake, you probably won't feel good. But if you want that cake, you should have cake.
Yeah. Don't not have the cake.
Don't not have the cake.
Don't not have the cake. Yeah.
I mean, I think about that for myself. And I think if I had a really serious illness and my time was limited, I'd probably change the way I'm eating now. I eat a particular way because I'm trying to be healthy for my whole life.
Hmm.
But I'd probably eat a lot more ice cream. And I know that sounds kind of trivial and, not that important. But it does bring me, it brings me joy, but I'm careful with it because
Yeah.
it's not, I worry about it's not the way to get to be an old person.
Yeah.
Um,
I think it's about priorities. And
yeah.
when disease comes along, priorities shift, you know. I have an interesting question from Kathy. Kathy says, does palliative care include services for family members or, and your support system?
Yeah, Kathy, in palliative care, we do think about not just the whole person, but the whole person in the context of their life. So yes, family members, caregivers are a really important part of the care that we provide. And um, we have some work that we're doing right now, some research that we're conducting, and really to try and understand that.
Mhm.
How do we assess the experience of a family member or a caregiver? And then how can we respond? Because it can be pretty stressful for family members and for caregivers when your loved one is sick. You're worried, you're trying to help them, and take care of a lot of other things. So we do think a lot about that and how to provide that care, and making sure that not only the person who's sick is cared for, but that their support system is also being supported.
Absolutely. Caregiving is a task, and it's draining as well. And we've had a lot of caregivers on the show as well. I think that's such a good point and so valuable, because often they tend to get overlooked, I think, by themselves, right? Their focus is so much on the person they're giving care to that often they're not realizing. I've seen it in my own family, that they're not realizing the physical and mental, drain that it's having on their own bodies. So I think that's awesome that that's offered as well. Naomi says, I have a palliative care doctor, but all he does is prescribe pain meds and antidepressants, and there's never any conversations like this. So already that makes me feel good about the conversation we're having, Dr. Pantilat. But Naomi's question is, do I need to seek out another palliative care doctor if that's what she's receiving and all that she's receiving?
Well, Naomi, palliative care really should include not just managing your symptoms, that's really important, but also kind of your emotional, psychological, spiritual state, and how you're thinking about your illness and kind of decisions that you're making going forward. So if for some reason you're not getting that, I would maybe encourage you to ask your palliative care doctor about that. Hey, can we talk about these other things? The things that are important to me. Here's the other things that I'm thinking about. You might start with just asking about like decision-making in the future. Who will make decisions for you if you got too sick to talk to the doctors? We call that a surrogate, right? Someone who would speak for you if you couldn't speak, the person you trust to do that. That might open up some conversations that might get you to the kinds of things that, we've been talking about this morning. But yeah, palliative care should include all of that. And if that's not happening for you, I always say bring it up with your doctor first, but if not, it might well be time to find someone else. And you have that right.
Totally. It all comes back to what you need and what your goals are.
That's right.
So next question from Melissa. Melissa says, besides cancer, what other situations can be referred to palliative care? I'm a net patient taking care of my 87-year-old mother. She has some heart issues, among other minor issues, and caring for her has become overwhelming. Who do I talk to? Her primary doctor?
Yeah, great question.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, palliative care can help with any serious illness. So it can help with heart disease, Parkinson's disease, bad lung disease like emphysema or interstitial lung disease, really any serious illness that could be, limiting your life, dementia. So we see people, with a whole range of different conditions. So your mom might be a perfect candidate for meeting with palliative care. And yeah, I would talk to her doctor, to her primary care doctor, to her cardiologist. And then again, if they're reluctant, you can just suggest why. We're really thinking about the kind of decisions we want to make in the future. I want to make sure that we're focusing on her quality of life, what kind of support we can provide for her and for our whole family. Issues like that should be convincing and would be totally appropriate for palliative care.
Absolutely. Folks, if you joined us late, we are with Dr. Stephen Pantilat talking about palliative care today. This is Luncheon with the Experts, the Carcinoid Cancer Foundation. We appreciate you being here. We are a little bit over halfway through today. A lot of great conversation today. This stuff always pulls at my heartstrings. This is what I love about what I do in the medical field is this aspect of it. So I appreciate your time, Dr. Pantilat.
Yeah.
Karen says, I'm an occupational therapist, net patient, and a daughter of a net patient. I'm very interested in the role of OT, occupational therapy, in the field of palliative care. Does a palliative care team typically include occupational therapy? I'm hearing a lot of my professional language in this afternoon, and I love it. Well, we love you being here, Karen. Dr. Pantilat, thoughts on that?
So Karen, it's a great point. So we do a lot of referring to occupational therapy and physical therapy. I wish I could say that we had occupational therapy and physical therapy as part of our team, but unfortunately we don't. Many of our patients benefit from that. Not all of them do, and it's our team is such that it's hard to sort of have our own occupational therapist who's a part of our team. But I think close collaboration between palliative care and occupational therapy is really, really important. And as I said, we refer a lot. And I think the more we talk with our occupational therapy colleagues and the more they talk with us, the more we can help each other, and help our patients to know how we can work together and how we can help each other. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And back to that video series that I mentioned, not to keep plugging that, but I just think it's so pertinent to what we're talking about today. We discussed that too, how to how to go back to work as a net patient, when to go back to work, how to tell your coworkers or your employers. I mean, your job, your occupation is a huge part of your life. And when you
Absolutely.
become diagnosed, your disease is a huge part of your life. They're going to overlap, they're going to intersect, and you have to navigate those intersections. So it's important to think about and to start thinking about it sooner rather than later. Dr. Pantilat, I've had a question since the beginning, and we talked about occupational therapy. Now, you mentioned seeking out therapy to help people emotionally, psychologically through this. How strongly do you suggest someone seeking out therapy for their mental health, their mental happiness when faced with a disease like this?
Yeah, that's so important. I think it's really, really important. And, being able to talk about the impact of illness on your life, on your psyche, on the things you want to do. I often say that, when you get a serious illness diagnosis like this one, it's like you've been flying on a plane, and you're sitting back and you're reading a book and sipping a drink. And then all of a sudden the plane drops 10,000 feet and you look out and there's an engine on fire.
Mm.
And that's what it's like when the doctor says, you have cancer, you have this tumor, and you feel like you're going to die in that moment. And it's really distressing. And the future that you had laid out for yourself and the things you were going to do and the way your life was going to unfold are suddenly thrown into chaos. And in palliative care, our message is, yeah, that's true. This is a different flight. We might be going to a different destination, and you're not going to be able to sit back. You're going to have to be a co-pilot on this flight, but you can get this flight back in control, and you can get this plane to fly smoothly. And palliative care can really help you do that by really thinking about, where are we going? How do we get this under control? And your mental health is such an important part of that. So getting that assessed, getting help with it, not being embarrassed or ashamed about it. Stress is stress. You just got to deal with it and get help with it. And the other thing I tell, it is really important. A lot of people say, well, who wouldn't be depressed if they had cancer? And the answer is most people are not depressed. Depression is abnormal, even in the face of serious illness, and it can be treated, and it can get better, and it can make your quality of life better.
Also,
So
that take is like, so what? You just dismiss it? Because, that's so dismissive. That's a
yeah,
terrible take.
yeah,
Okay, interesting question to piggyback on the therapy question. I come, I come from a place or people that, therapy is not the first answer to a question. In fact, most people resist it, right? I don't know if that's because I'm a man or because I'm a Southern man and grew up in, a rural community where, it's just like therapy. Now, I've been to therapy in the past. I've been to therapy recently. I understand the value of it. I think it's incredibly valuable. And as I've become older, I've learned more and more about the value of it. So I'm not here to uphold that perspective. I'm all for dismantling that thought or preconceived notion on therapy. But for those people that may come from that mindset or that background, that thinking about jumping into therapy may be something they need to ease into. Are there other similar solutions? What are other similar solutions they can do to get these things out to discuss? My mind goes to support groups. Are there things, that may be, I don't know, allowing them to gradually, move in that path if they're the type of person that is, a little resistant to the idea of therapy for whatever reason. Does that make sense?
yeah. You could talk about it. You can begin these conversations, with your doctor, with your nurse, just having these conversations about how you're feeling, what you're experiencing, kind of what you're going through. We raise these issues. I ask people, how's your mood? How are you feeling? How are you feeling in yourself? To try and get at these things. Are you at peace? Which is a way of sort of asking, like, just how are
That's a good
things
one.
inside? Are you feeling at peace or not at peace? If you're not, what's that about? The reason we have one of the reasons that we have social workers and chaplains on our team is that people sometimes feel more comfortable talking to our social worker, right? Or they might feel more comfortable talking to our chaplain. And so there can be different ways of, and different people that you might relate to as far as just talking about what your experience is, and really understanding that, there's such a close connection between our mind and our bodies, and how we feel overall, and really addressing that is important. Sometimes I will also tell my patients, look, this is not about talk therapy if you're not comfortable, but psychiatrists are experts in understanding people's emotional experience and understanding stress and understanding mood. And I'd really like their help. I would like their help in helping you. So if you would just go there and talk to them and let them do an assessment, that would really help us, because maybe they can recommend better medications, for example. And sometimes people are willing to do that when they're not willing to do talk therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes talk therapy happens, while that's going on, and people get benefit. And so, there can be many ways to,
yeah, that's basically what I was asking.
get us into the right place.
Speaking of all those things being tied together, Rebecca says, my doctors told me to eat ice cream daily if I want to. So that seems to,
I like that.
that seems to go along with the theme that we have here. Interesting question from Rose. Rose says, so is palliative care addressing symptoms? And if so, are NET treatments considered a type of palliative care, since once the disease has metastasized, it is non-curable, and treatment is concerned with slowing down the progression of the disease? I think I get where she's coming from, but what do you?
Yeah, Rose, that's such a good question,
isn't it?
Well, there's a way that you could look at all the treatments for illnesses that are not curable as palliative, right? Trying to help you live as well as possible for as long as possible, and trying to improve your quality of life. So I think there is a way in which we can think of it that way. I'll be honest with you. Most people who provide those treatments don't think of it that way. And in palliative care, we don't always think of it that way, even though the goals are exactly the same. Yeah, you could think of it that way. In palliative care, we think about the work we do as treatments that are not focused on the illness itself.
Mm-hmm.
So while it's true that some of the chemotherapy is exactly what you say, Rose, it's about controlling the illness, slowing it down, limiting its impact on your life and your body. And so in that way, I suppose you could call it, palliative care. We tend to still think of it as kind of disease-directed treatment, and maybe as separate from what we're trying to do. But the goals would be the same. Great observation.
Yeah, I think so too. Karen says music helps me, and I'm sure she's not alone in that, but it makes me think of a question. What do you think about hobbies? Are hobbies important? Having something that's not your job that you kind of dedicate a little time to? Learning, just working on something, whatever that might be.
I think anything that gives your life meaning and creates, joy is good. We talk about joy, gratitude, love, kindness, all these what we call pro-social emotions. We think about the anti-social ones, but thinking about the pro-social ones.
I love that.
And so the things that make you happy, things that create gratitude in your life and joy, and things that bring you joy. Yeah, those are the things, honestly, those are the things we should be doing all the time and making room for in our lives all the time. Serious illness in many ways makes that more urgent, and it makes us think like, yeah, I got to do that now. That's something I like to do. I'm not going to save it for my retirement or save it for the future. These are things I should have been doing all along. And certainly I want to be doing them now.
Are there any practices that you see routinely that are really beneficial for people to initiate that sort of emotional switch, or focusing on those things like joy and gratitude?
There's really good evidence for a gratitude journal. So I keep one. Every night before I go to bed, I have a little journal by my bedside, and I write down 3 things I'm grateful for. And it's been studied actually that it actually improves your mood and makes you feel less burned out at work and just brings more joy. So focusing on things you're grateful for. It's hard to be grateful and angry at the same time. So it really does focus your mind on all the things that you can be grateful for, even when things are difficult. And there's a wonderful poem by Carrie Newcomer called Three Gratitudes that really makes this point about once you get going on gratitude, you can really run with it and think about all the things in your life that you're grateful for. So that's one practice that's really simple and really effective. If people like to write, journaling your experience, just journaling without, thinking too much about it, but just what's your experience? What are you going through? So people who like to write, that can be really effective. And a lot of people get a lot of benefit from mindfulness. So starting a mindfulness practice, there are lots of apps that can guide you that way in mindfulness practice. You talked about music before. Music is great. Playing music, learning to play music, listening to music, that can be really helpful. A lot of people find a benefit from just being out in nature.
Yeah.
Getting yourself outside and being in nature can be really healing and really therapeutic for a lot of people.
That connection to nature is no joke. Sometimes people feel like it may sound a little too woo-woo or whatever, but this is where we come from. And there's been studies on that too. I've read several books on that about and it takes a little while. You can't just walk out. I mean, you can feel some benefits in the first few minutes, but when you spend a little bit of time in nature consistently, there's been a lot of studies that show that too. That's that connection to other life and not just screens and technology. And that's not just to bash technology, but that connection to nature is huge in being connected to yourself, I've found, and the stuff that I've read. Next question from Rebecca. Folks, we have just a little bit more than 10 minutes left. Great conversation today with Dr. Stephen Pantilat about palliative care. Rebecca says, Doctor, thanks for your time. When do you decide that it's time for disability? My boss is so understanding with me and works with me. I'm blessed to be able to work from home when I'm not feeling well, but I do feel like a burden, not only at work, but at home as well. My faith is strong and I know God has me and I'm here and God calls me home, but I feel drained, fatigued, along with all the other symptoms that go along with small bowel nets. At what point do you decide that it's time for disability? How do you make that decision?
Oh, that's a really good question, Rebecca. And I'm sorry you're struggling with that question. I would say it depends, on your goals, what's important to you, how much you're getting out of work, and how much you feel like that's an important part of what you want to be doing. How stressful is it to go to work, and how much is that maybe taking away from the things that are most important? And what opportunities and what kind of how flexible things can be. So it's a really individual question, between you, your doctor, your boss, to really figure out what that's like, and whether you can do that temporarily and then come back. I'm sure you've thought about that already, but there are a lot of questions, and this is the kind of conversation we might have with our patients in our visits. I was going to say in clinic, but so much of what we do now is actually by video, by telemedicine. Right. But just really have this conversation and to think that through, like, what's the most meaningful parts of work? How much work do you think you could reasonably do? And how does that align with what your company needs? And as you said earlier, people get a lot of joy from their work, a lot of benefits from their work. They feel good about the way they're contributing. And so you don't want to lose that. On the other hand, there can be a lot of stress associated with it. So again, it's one of those things where you're trying to find the balance of what's most important.
Yeah. Sometimes it's difficult to even think about that. You have to really write it down and stop and think about what are the actions that I take that bring me real joy? That's and what are the ones that cause me stress? That's right. A lot of times we go through life and don't even really understand. And actually there's a question that pertains to that. Suzanne says, my husband has carcinoid syndrome. And he always says that he's fine. I'm fine. Is there anything you can suggest for me to get him to understand that he needs to be more proactive in his quality of life instead of just pushing through every day like he doesn't have a serious health issue?
Well, I'd say two things. One, you can sort of, well, the first thing I'll say is that, for a lot of people, pushing through like you don't have an illness is really a great coping mechanism. And we sort of we sort of knock denial as being bad, but for a lot of people, for a lot of us, me included, denial is what gets you up in the morning and makes it possible to just kind of move ahead. I think there are times when it gets in the way, like if you're not actually taking care of business, if you're ignoring what's really going on, that can be a problem. If you're ignoring symptoms that are a sign that something's going wrong. But if it's what gets you up and going, that can, I think we have to be careful before kind of piercing denial, or at least recognizing that it has a role in the range of responses to serious illness. So that's one thing I would say. The other thing I would say is, just asking some of the specific things. There are, we often go through, like when patients come to our practice, we give them a little survey and we run through a list of about 10 different symptoms. We ask about quality of life. We ask about, are you at peace? We ask, what are the major issues going on for you? What are the major concerns that you have? We ask about well-being and sleep and tiredness, fatigue, pain, shortness of breath, like a whole host of symptoms. And sometimes people may not think of that on their own, but as you start going through the list, you're like, oh, well, yeah, I guess that is something that's going on. And this is something, and it helps to guide. So that may be another way, is to really think about kind of a list like that, of just thinking about, hey, are there ways to get help?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for your question, Suzanne. That's a tough one to navigate. I mean, because we really have to empathize with the other person to understand what's best for them. Obviously, you're coming from a place where you care about him very much, and it's difficult to see that, but I think it's a good point, Dr. Pantilat. And for me, like, I love the work that I do. I don't love every aspect of it. So if I were to be diagnosed and I might not want to spend my time on the things that stress me out, but filmmaking and writing, like, I would still be doing that, and having something like that to focus on would be helpful for me. So we all navigate it differently.
Yeah.
It's tough.
And I think it's also important to just remember that, we talked about the impact on caregivers, but just that the illness does have an impact on caregivers. Some of it is, the patient's dealing with it in their way, but there's an impact on the people around them as well. And making sure, I'd say for Suzanne, to make sure that you're getting your needs met as well. I think there is a way sometimes in doing the caregiving that we ignore the things that we need, and to just make sure that you're also taking care of yourself and getting, whatever those needs are, whatever's important to you, addressed as well.
Absolutely. Super, super important. And a lot of people, I've seen it, a lot of people neglect their needs, and it can take a toll. Folks, I just want to say we've got about 5 minutes left, but I've really been enjoying seeing the comments to each other. I always say every week that this show, and I think effectively CCF as a whole, does two things very, very well. One, educate and inform people about this disease, or spread that information, and two, cultivate and create the community. This show specifically, I see it today in the comments. Dr. Pantilat, a lot of people are sharing their experience because of the content that we're talking about today. And I just want to say that I love that. I appreciate you all doing that, and I hope you all appreciate each other doing that, because I think that's so important. Besides just talking to experts and doctors, sharing your own experiences, especially with something like this when we're talking about quality of life, because what works for one does not work for another necessarily. So good on you for that. Dr. Pantilat, what does your day-to-day look like?
So on the clinical side, taking care of patients is, I will say, even before the pandemic, we were doing a lot of telemedicine.
Okay.
Just because, when people are sick, coming to the medical center can be kind of burdensome for people. And,
Sure.
Often people are coming from far away because they want specialized treatment for their serious illness. So I'm in San Francisco, UCSF is in San Francisco, but people are coming from all over California, Oregon, Nevada, all over the country. to get care. And so it's just not that convenient for people. And so we were doing a lot of telemedicine beforehand. Now we're doing tons of telemedicine. So almost all of it, in fact, our care is now by telemedicine. So we see people, in their homes. I'm right here. This is my office. This is my clinical office. So here we are, and here I am, seeing patients, and we're on Zoom, and it's not uncommon that we might have the patient and their spouse or partner, and then maybe they have family members, children around the country. So we may have 3 or 4 screens. One child is on the East Coast, and one's in the Midwest, and one's in, another city in California. And my nurse is at her house, and my social worker is at her house. And, so we have like 7 or 8 screens going at once, to really kind of bring everybody into the conversation. And so that's what that looks like, and sort of following up. And then I have a whole other part of my work where I take care of people in the hospital for palliative care as well, and then do my research and my writing and my teaching.
Yeah. And speaking of your writing, Wanda says, I have strong faith. I know the power of prayer. Bad news is my journey with Nets. But living in peace and joy has grown along with my faith. And your book and this conversation are truly good news. So grateful. We're grateful for you as well.
Thanks, Wanda.
Yeah, absolutely. Lorraine says, fabulous show today. She has to run out, but she'll be replaying it. A lot of people sending sweet notes. Thank you both so much for discussing. This is from Fred, discussing a subject that is very difficult for us to think about. I think that's a good point. I mean, these sorts of things are hard for people to navigate. Dr. Pantilat, probably our last question. We just have a few minutes left, and I'm always interested in this, the early stage, the diagnosis, especially for someone who has heard the word cancer, has a very profound traumatic effect on a lot of people, confusing at times, especially with a disease that's this unique.
That's true.
As a neuroendocrine tumor.
Yeah.
So first step, from your perspective, from the palliative care perspective, what is your advice to that new patient that just got diagnosed with a disease like this?
Yeah. So, one, you're going to have to hear it again. Often when you first get that bad news, it's like you just can't hear anything. If people remember the old Peanuts cartoons, Charlie Brown, it's like when the adults talk, it's just like, wah, wah, wah.
Oh,
you
man.
can't hear anything. It's like someone with cancer, and then your brain just turns off. So coming back, maybe recording what the doctor says, bringing someone with you who can take notes and remember. If you can record it, and then you can listen to it later to really get the information, number one. Number two, it's almost never like an emergency where something has to happen right away. So get yourself together, have a reaction, meet again. If you need, if it's the kind of thing that really benefits from expert care, and net illness is, figure out, where am I going to go? Like, where in my neighborhood am I going to get like the best possible care, or at least meet with an expert in my field? So do some research. I would say the internet, I think, is both good for this and a problem for this. So there's a lot of crazy stuff out there, and there's a lot of really good information. So find the websites that you trust that really have good information, like the CCF. I think really good information is really important. And then, start to develop your plan for going forward. Don't just hide from it. I think that's maybe the most important thing when people talk about, talking about this is so good. It is what it is, and not talking about it will not make it go away. It won't make you feel better. It won't change the reality. Dealing with it, talking about what's important to you will often encourage more hope, more courage, and give you the ability to move forward and take it sort of head on and really know what you're dealing with. And I'm a big believer in that. And that's part of what we do in palliative care, is really say, let's talk about the hard things. When I ask my patients what's most important, what do you hope will happen? It's not uncommon. Someone will say, well, my daughter's getting married next year, and I want to be at the wedding. And I'm like, I'm worried about that. Do you have to wait a year? I can't tell you how often the wedding is just rescheduled, so it can happen sooner. Like, if that's the most important thing to you, let's get that done now. Maybe it would work in a year, but who knows? Let's do it now. And so really thinking about those things. And it's only by talking about what's hard that you can really understand what's important and make sure that that you get to do those things that are the most important to you, because that's what it's about, right? It's about how you live your life. And that's true for all of us. And I think that's what the serious illnesses tell us. It's about each of us living our best life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's a perfect place. We have brought it back full circle from where we started. Perfect place to end the show today. Dr. Pantilat, thank you so much. We'll send you some of the comments. Everybody is just really happy with this conversation today. Appreciate your time so much. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Rain. Yep.
Absolutely. And thanks to all of you at home for joining us. As always, we hope this program helped answer some of your questions. Again, I'll reiterate, if you have further questions, follow-up questions, reach out to Carcinoid Cancer Foundation here on the Facebook page. You can send them a private message or at their website, carcinoid.org. Thanks again, as always, to our presenting sponsor, Tercera Therapeutics. And finally, my name is Rain Bennett. I have been your host. Thank you for watching, and please join us next time on Luncheon with the Experts. Stay healthy, stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.